For 25 years, Eleanor Vance was the perfect corporate wife, the silent partner in her husband Richard's glittering success. She hosted the dinners, raised their children, and managed their magnificent home while he built a real estate empire. But while she was balancing their books, he was spending millions from their joint accounts on a secret life. A life with a younger woman filled with private jets, designer jewels, and lavish getaways. When he finally demanded a divorce, offering her a pittance to disappear quietly, he believed he held all the cards. He had no idea his unassuming wife was about to play a hand worth $60 million. The Vance residence in Greenwich, Connecticut was less a house and more a statement. A sprawling 7-bedroom colonial revival, it sat perched on 4 acres of meticulously manicured land, its white columns gleaming like polished bone in the afternoon sun. Inside the silence was a commodity thick and expensive. It was the kind of quiet that cost a fortune to maintain, buffered from the outside world by mature oak trees and the hushed efficiency of a full-time staff. Eleanor Vance, at 49, moved through this silence with a practiced grace that had become second nature. Today she was arranging a bouquet of white peonies in the grand foyer, their delicate scent a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the marble floor beneath her. Her husband, Richard, 52, was due home any minute from a business trip to Chicago. He was always on a business trip. To the outside world, they were a power couple. Richard was the charismatic founder of Vance Capital Properties, a man who had turned a modest inheritance into a real estate portfolio worth hundreds of millions. Eleanor was his elegant, steadfast wife, the woman who had stood by him since his days in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. They had 2 children, Lily, a junior at Yale, and Thomas, a recent graduate working in finance in New York City. They were the picture of American success. But pictures, Eleanor knew, could be deceiving. The perfection of their life had begun to feel like a veneer, a thin layer of gold leaf over something cheap and rotten. It started with small things. The scent of an unfamiliar perfume, a cloying sweet gardenia that clung to his suit jackets. The way his phone, once left casually on the nightstand, was now perpetually in his pocket or face down guarded like a state secret. Then came the financial discrepancies. Eleanor had always managed their personal accounts. It was a role Richard had gladly abdicated to her years ago, calling it domestic bookkeeping, with a dismissive wave of his hand. He preferred the thrill of the big deal, the multi-million-dollar handshake. But recently the numbers had stopped making sense. She first noticed it 6 months ago. A charge for $12,000 at Cartier on a supplementary American Express card she didn't recognize. When she gently inquired, Richard had been irritable. It was for a client L, a closing gift for Mrs. Davenport. You know how these things work. But Eleanor knew Helen Davenport. Her taste ran to modern art, not diamond tennis bracelets. Eleanor let it go, but a seed of doubt had been planted in the fertile ground of her intuition. The client gifts became more frequent and more extravagant. A charge for 2 first-class tickets to St. Bart's for a weekend he was supposedly at a conference in Dallas. A wire transfer for $50,000 to a holding company she'd never heard of, Ass Designs LLC. A lease agreement for a Porsche 911, not for him but co-signed for an Amber Sterling. Amber Sterling. The name felt like a slap. Eleanor typed it into Google, her fingers trembling slightly. The screen filled with images of a woman half her age. Amber was a social media influencer, all sculpted cheekbones, impossibly long legs, and a manufactured pout. Her Instagram feed was a curated fantasy of luxury, posing on the balcony of the Four Seasons George V in Paris, sipping champagne on a yacht in Monaco, showing off a new Cartier love bracelet identical to the one on the mystery receipt. The caption read, "My baby knows just how to spoil me, #blessed." The world tilted on its axis. The silent, expensive house suddenly felt like a prison. Every photograph on the mantelpiece of their wedding, of family vacations, of a smiling younger Richard, was a lie. He wasn't just having an affair. He was funding an entirely separate, obscenely expensive life with their money. Her money, too. The money she had carefully managed, invested, and grown while he took all the credit. The pain was sharp and visceral, a physical ache in her chest. But beneath the pain, a different emotion began to crystallize, cold and hard as a diamond anger. Not a fiery, screaming rage, but a quiet, calculating fury. Richard had mistaken her gentle nature for weakness. He had mistaken her silence for ignorance. He had underestimated her for the last time. That evening, when Richard walked through the door, he was the picture of the weary but successful husband. He dropped his briefcase, loosened his tie, and gave her a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. He smelled faintly of gardenias. Long trip. He sighed, heading for the bar cart. The Chicago deal is turning into a real headache. Eleanor simply smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm sure you'll handle it, dear," she said, her voice even and calm. "You always do." As he poured himself a scotch, his back to her, she watched the man she had loved for 25 years. The man who was now a stranger. He had no idea that while he was in Chicago, she had spent the afternoon on a very different kind of business call. It was a call to a number she hadn't dialed in over a decade, to a man in Boston who managed a part of her life that Richard knew nothing about. Her plan was already in motion. The quiet storm was gathering. The weeks that followed Eleanor's discovery were a masterclass in quiet surveillance. She became a ghost in her own life, observing, documenting, and compiling a dossier on her husband's betrayal that would have impressed a seasoned private investigator. The role of the docile, oblivious wife was one she had played for years. Now she wielded it as a weapon. She started with the finances. Late at night, in the solitude of her study, with the rest of the grand house sleeping, she would dive into their labyrinthine accounts. Richard had become sloppy arrogant in his belief that she wouldn't look too closely. He had opened a new set of credit cards under a corporate account but linked them to their primary joint bank account for payments. It was a fatal mistake. The statements told a sordid story in black and white. Thousands of dollars at Bergdorf Goodman. A standing weekly reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant where a table for two cost more than a mortgage payment. A charge for $250,000 as a down payment on a luxury condo in Soho registered to AS Designs LLC. He was hemorrhaging money, siphoning their shared wealth into the insatiable void of his affair. He had spent, by her careful calculation, just over $3.5 million in the last 18 months alone. Eleanor printed everything, her calm demeanor belying the tremor in her hands. Each receipt was a fresh stab of betrayal, yet it also fueled her resolve. She hired a forensic accountant, a discreet professional recommended by her Boston contact to trace every dollar. His name was Peter Hayes, a quiet man with sharp eyes who understood the need for absolute secrecy. "He's either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid," Peter remarked during one of their encrypted video calls, scrolling through a spreadsheet. "He's commingling marital assets with funds for his associate. This is a divorce lawyer's dream, Mrs. Vance." "That's what I was hoping," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. Her investigation wasn't just financial. She delved into Amber Sterling's digital life. The woman chronicled every moment, every gift, every trip. There was the ski vacation in Aspen where Amber posed in a new Moncler jacket. Eleanor remembered Richard claiming he was at a tech summit in San Jose that week. There was the photo of Amber's wrist adorned with a new Patek Philippe watch captioned, "Time flies when you're in love." Eleanor recognized the distinctive blue face of the watch. Richard had claimed his own had been stolen from his gym locker a month prior. The most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Richard had always been meticulous about his car, a sleek black Mercedes S-Class. One afternoon, while the car was at the house, she found a reason to retrieve a file from the glove compartment. Tucked away beneath the owner's manual was a small velvet-covered jeweler's box. It wasn't from Cartier or Tiffany, but from a bespoke jeweler on Madison Avenue known for engagement rings. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was a canary yellow diamond ring, at least 5 carats, ostentatious and impossibly bright. It was the kind of ring Amber would flaunt on Instagram, a trophy of her conquest. He was going to propose. He was going to leave her and attempt to start a new life built on the foundations of their old one. That night the children came home for a family dinner. Seeing them strong and happy and oblivious almost broke her. Lily, passionate and quick-witted like her father, was full of stories about her political science class. Thomas, more reserved and analytical like her, spoke about a promising deal his team was working on. Richard was in his element, playing the proud patriarch. He laughed, offered advice, and basked in their admiration. Eleanor watched him, a hollow feeling spreading through her. He was performing just as she was. Their entire family life had become a stage play, and only she and Richard knew the script was a lie. "Mom, you're quiet tonight." Lily noted, her brow furrowed with concern. "Everything okay?" Eleanor forced a warm smile. "Just tired, darling. Your father's been running me ragged with his social calendar." She shot a look at Richard, a look he completely misinterpreted as one of wifely affection. He reached over and patted her hand. "She's my rock," he announced to the table. "Couldn't do any of it without my Elle." The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost breathtaking. In that moment Eleanor felt a profound shift. The pain was still there, a dull, constant throb, but the grief for her marriage was beginning to recede. It was being replaced by a steely determination to protect herself, and more importantly, to protect the future she had secured for her children long before Richard had decided to throw theirs away. After dinner, she went back to her study and made another call. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice clear and firm. "It's Eleanor Vance. I think it's time we move to the next phase. He's crossed a line. Please prepare the documents." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you certain, Eleanor?" the old lawyer asked, his voice kind but serious. "Once we set this in motion, there is no turning back." Eleanor looked at the canary diamond ring she'd photographed and placed back in its box. She thought of Amber Sterling's smug smile and Richard's casual, devastating betrayal. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," she replied. "Richard is about to find out what a bad investment he's made." The man on the other end of the line was Arthur Harrison, senior partner at the venerable Boston law firm of Harrison, Albright and Finch. He was 75 years old, with a mind as sharp as a newly minted razor, and had been the custodian of Eleanor's family secrets for over 30 years. He had known her since she was a girl, long before she was Eleanor Vance. He knew her as Eleanor Pemberton. The Pembertons were old money, the kind that didn't appear in glossy magazines or on reality television shows. Their wealth was quiet, multi-generational, and deeply embedded in the fabric of Boston's financial and philanthropic history. They were shipping magnates in the 19th century, then shrewd investors in the 20th. They didn't build glass towers with their name on them. They funded university libraries, endowed hospital wings, and managed their fortune with a level of discretion that bordered on paranoia. When Eleanor, their only child, had fallen in love with the ambitious, charismatic, but ultimately middle-class Richard Vance, her family had been skeptical. They saw a hunger in him they didn't trust. But Eleanor was in love. She wanted a life that was hers, not one dictated by her family name. So she made a choice she would live on Richard's terms, supporting his dreams, and building a life with him separate from the Pemberton legacy. Her grandmother, the formidable matriarch Beatrice Pemberton, had understood, but had taken precautions. On Eleanor's 25th birthday, just before her wedding, Beatrice had sat her down in the library of their Beacon Hill home. "My dear," she had said, her voice raspy with age but firm with authority, "love is a beautiful thing, but it is not always a wise one. You are a Pemberton. You will always be a Pemberton. We will not interfere in your marriage, but we will protect you." Beatrice had then explained the terms of the Pemberton Discretionary Trust. It was an ironclad, irrevocable trust set up in Eleanor's name, managed by Mr. Harrison's firm. It was a sprawling portfolio of blue-chip stocks, real estate holdings in Boston and London, and a significant art collection. At the time, it was worth around $20 million. Over the past 25 years, under Mr. Harrison's brilliant stewardship, it had grown exponentially. The trust had several key stipulations drafted by Beatrice's cunning legal mind. First, it was entirely separate from any marital assets. It was legally untouchable by any spouse in the event of a divorce. Second, Eleanor could draw a modest annual stipend, which she had used discreetly over the years for personal charities and to help her children without Richard's knowledge. Third, and most importantly, the principal of the trust could only be fully accessed and controlled by Eleanor under specific circumstances, one of which was the dissolution of her marriage due to gross misconduct or financial malfeasance on the part of her spouse. Your husband, Beatrice had warned all those years ago, has the ambition of a king but the blood of a commoner. Men like that are often tempted to build their kingdoms on the ruins of the women who love them. This is your fortress. Beatrice had been right. Everything is in place, Eleanor, Mr. Harrison said over the phone. Peter Hayes's forensic report is damning. We have irrefutable proof of dissipated marital assets exceeding $3 million. We have the lease agreements, the credit card statements, the travel records. It's an open and shut case of infidelity and financial fraud. And the trust? Eleanor asked. The board has been notified. We've invoked the moral turpitude clause. The moment a divorce petition is filed, you will have complete and unrestricted access to the full principal and all its assets. The current valuation as of this morning's market close is $62,430,000. Eleanor closed her eyes, the number hanging in the air. It felt abstract, unreal. It was a fortune she had intentionally ignored for a quarter of a century, a secret identity she had packed away in a trunk. Now it was her salvation. Her strategy devised with Mr. Harrison was simple and brutal. They would let Richard make the first move. They knew his ego and his mounting financial recklessness would force his hand. He was undoubtedly preparing to blindside her to offer her a lowball settlement, assuming she was a financially naive housewife who would be grateful for any scraps he threw her way. He would try to paint her as dependent while hiding the millions he had already stolen. He'll try to bully you, Eleanor, Mr. Harrison warned. Let him, she replied, a cold calm settling over her. He thinks he's holding a royal flush, but he doesn't even know what game we're playing. The next step was to secure her immediate assets. Under the guise of a portfolio, rebalancing Eleanor with Peter Hayes's guidance began moving liquid funds from their joint accounts into a new separate account under her name only. She did it in increments small enough to avoid raising red flags. It was a war chest. She also took a trip to their bank's safe deposit box, a box Richard hadn't visited in years. Inside were her mother's jewels, some bearer bonds her father had left her, and the original notarized documents for the Pemberton Trust. She removed the trust documents and replaced them with copies, placing the originals in a secure location with Mr. Harrison's firm. Her final preparation was the hardest. She had to tell her children. She drove to New Haven to see Lily and took Thomas to dinner in the city. She didn't give them every sordid detail, but she told them the truth that their father was having an affair and that a divorce was imminent. The news shattered them. Lily was furious, her anger directed squarely at Richard. Thomas was quieter, his hurt manifesting as withdrawn silence. "But why didn't you say anything, Mom?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. "All this time?" "Because I needed to be smart, not just angry," Eleanor explained, her voice aching with the weight of her deception. "I needed to protect us. All of us. Your father, he has not been honest about our finances. Things are complicated." "We're with you, Mom," Lily said fiercely, taking her hand. 100%. Whatever you need. Their support was the final piece of armor she needed. She returned to the gilded cage in Greenwich, no longer a prisoner, but a warden waiting for the inmate to make his final fatal error. She continued to play her part, arranging flowers, planning menus, and smiling serenely at her husband. The quiet storm was about to make landfall. Richard chose a Tuesday evening to detonate their life. It was a calculated move. He'd just returned from a triumphant closing on a new commercial property downtown, a deal that had netted his firm a handsome profit. He was flush with victory and arrogance, the perfect cocktail for cruelty. He found Eleanor in the conservatory tending to her orchids. The setting sun cast long shadows across the glass panels, and for a moment he felt a pang of something nostalgia, perhaps, for the woman who had created this peaceful, perfect world for him. He quickly suppressed it. Amber was waiting for him in her new Soho condo, a world of excitement, passion, and most importantly, adoration. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said, his tone clipped and businesslike. He didn't sit down. He stood over her, a power posture he used in boardrooms. Eleanor set down her watering can and turned to face him, her expression placid. "Of course, Richard. What is it?" "I'm not going to beat around the bush," he began, launching into a clearly rehearsed speech. "This marriage, it hasn't been working for a long time. We've grown apart. We want different things. I think it's time we were honest with ourselves." He paused, expecting tears, pleading, or an argument. He received only a calm, expectant silence. It unnerved him. "I want a divorce," he said flatly. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if he were discussing the weather. "I see." Her lack of reaction threw him off balance. "Look, I want this to be as amicable as possible for the sake of the children," he continued, regaining his footing. "I've had my lawyer, David Finch, draw up a proposal. I think you'll find it's very generous." He placed a thick manila envelope on the wicker table between them. "I'm prepared to let you have this house. It's too big for me anyway. And I'll provide you with a settlement of $2 million. That, combined with alimony of $20,000 a month for the next 5 years, should be more than enough for you to live comfortably." He watched her, expecting her to be overwhelmed by his generosity. The house was worth nearly $10 million, and the settlement sounded like a fortune to a woman he believed had never earned a dollar in her life. Eleanor didn't touch the envelope. $2 million, she repeated, her voice neutral. "And the house. That's your offer." "It's more than fair, Elle," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. "Let's be realistic. Our liquid assets are tied up in the business. Vance Capital is leveraged to the hilt for the new waterfront project. This is what's available. Taking more would cripple the company, and by extension the alimony I can pay you." It was a masterful lie woven with threads of truth. The company was leveraged, but not because of a new project. It was leveraged to cover his extravagant spending and to fund Amber's lifestyle. He was offering her a fraction of their marital assets, counting on her ignorance to accept it. The $3.5 million he had already siphoned off was of course not mentioned. "You've been very busy, Richard," Eleanor said, her voice still unnervingly calm. She finally looked at him, her gaze direct and penetrating. For the first time he saw not the familiar, gentle wife, but a stranger with eyes like chips of ice. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "It means I won't be accepting your offer," she said simply. "And I suggest you find a new lawyer. David Finch is a partner at Harrison Albright and Finch, my lawyer's firm. I imagine that constitutes a significant conflict of interest." Richard stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. "Your lawyer? What are you talking about? You don't have a lawyer." "Oh, but I do," Eleanor replied, standing up. She was no longer the meek wife tending her flowers. She was a woman of equal stature. "I've had a lawyer for 30 years. His name is Arthur Harrison, and he is very, very good at what he does." The color drained from Richard's face. He knew the name Harrison Albright and Finch. They were legal titans, the kind of old money firm that wouldn't spit on a new money real estate developer like him. How did Eleanor have a lawyer like that? "You'll be hearing from him," Eleanor continued, walking past him towards the door. "He'll be sending your office a proper settlement proposal along with a complete accounting of the marital assets you've attempted to hide and the $3.5 million you've fraudulently dissipated over the last 18 months. I believe the term he used was financial malfeasance." Richard was speechless. He felt the floor drop out from under him. Financial malfeasance. How could she possibly know? He turned, grabbing her arm. "Eleanor, what is this? What game are you playing?" She pulled her arm away, her touch cold. "This isn't a game, Richard," she said, her voice finely laced with the steel he'd never known she possessed. "This is a reckoning. You built your kingdom, and now you're going to pay for it. I'll see you at the deposition." She walked out of the conservatory, leaving him standing amidst the beautiful blooming orchids in the ruins of the life he had just single-handedly destroyed. The manila envelope containing his generous offer lay on the table, a monument to his colossal miscalculation. He had come to deliver an execution only to find himself standing on the gallows. The conference room at Harrison, Albright and Finch was a study in old-world power. The walls were lined with dark mahogany and leather-bound books that smelled of history and money. The table, a single polished slab of wood large enough to seat 20, gleamed under the soft light of a brass chandelier. It was a room designed to intimidate. Richard Vance, however, was not easily intimidated. He sat beside his new lawyer, a slick, aggressive litigator named Mark Jacobs, radiating an aura of defiant confidence. He had spent the last 2 weeks in a state of controlled panic. Eleanor's initial volley had shocked him, but he'd recovered. He believed she was bluffing. She'd found out about some credit card bills. So what he and Jacobs had crafted a counter-narrative: the money was for legitimate business development, private client entertainment. It was a weak argument, but he believed he could bully his way through it. He still held the power. He was the earner, the creator of their wealth. Eleanor and Mr. Harrison entered the room precisely at 10:00 a.m. Eleanor was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress. She looked serene, her calm a stark contrast to Richard's barely concealed agitation. Mr. Harrison, with his shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes, looked less like a lawyer and more like a tenured professor about to lecture a particularly dim-witted student. "Good morning, gentlemen," Mr. Harrison said, his voice smooth and authoritative as he took his seat. "Shall we begin?" Mark Jacobs cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrison, my client has reviewed your aggressive initial proposal. While we dispute nearly all of your characterizations regarding dissipated assets in the interest of avoiding a protracted and messy legal battle, Mr. Vance is prepared to revise his initial offer." He slid a document across the table. "Mr. Vance will cede the Greenwich property to Mrs. Vance free and clear and increase the cash settlement to $5 million paid out over 2 years. The alimony offer stands. This is a final, very generous offer." Mr. Harrison didn't even glance at the document. He pushed it back across the table with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Mr. Jacobs," he said, a note of pity in his voice, "you and your client seem to be operating under a significant misapprehension. You believe you are here to negotiate the division of marital assets. That is at best a secondary concern." Richard scoffed. "A secondary concern, my business, our homes, our portfolio. That's all there is. What else could there be?" This was the moment. Eleanor met Mr. Harrison's eyes, and he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "What you fail to comprehend, Richard," Mr. Harrison began, leaning forward slightly, "is that the assets you created during your marriage are in the grand scheme of things relatively modest." Mark Jacobs laughed out loud. "Modest Vance Capital Properties is valued at over $90 million. Their shared portfolio is worth another 20. That's $110 million on the table. A respectable sum for a self-made man," Mr. Harrison conceded, "but it pales in comparison to Mrs. Vance's personal non-marital estate." Richard stared at him, bewildered. "Her personal estate? What are you talking about? She has a small inheritance. Her parents left her a few $100,000 at most. I manage it for her." Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "No, Richard. You manage the money I allowed you to see. You were never aware of my primary holdings." Mr. Harrison opened a pristine leather briefcase and produced a thick, spiral-bound document. He placed it gently on the table. The cover read, "The Pemberton Discretionary Trust, Q3 2025 Valuation Report. Mrs. Vance, or as she was known at birth, Eleanor Pemberton Vance is the sole beneficiary of this trust. Mr. Harrison explained, his voice even. It was established by her grandmother in 1999. As per the articles of the trust, it is designated as separate and non-marital property, completely insulated from any and all spousal claims. He let that sink in before delivering the final blow. Furthermore, the trust contains a moral turpitude clause which has been invoked by recent events. This clause grants Mrs. Vance full, immediate, and unrestricted control of the principal upon the filing of a divorce petition citing infidelity and financial malfeasance. The forensic accounting report we submitted, which details your spending on Miss Amber Sterling, was more than sufficient to trigger the clause. Richard's face was a mask of confusion, a dawning horror slowly creeping into his eyes. Pemberton. What is this trust worth? Mr. Harrison opened the report to the final page and turned it around for Richard and his lawyer to see. The summary was presented in a clean, simple chart. The bottom line number was in bold. Total asset value, $62,430,000. The silence in the room was absolute. Richard stared at the number, his mouth slightly agape. $60 million. His mind reeled. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. He looked from the paper to Eleanor, his eyes wide with disbelief. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married, the woman he had dismissed as a simple homemaker, was wealthier than he had ever been. His lawyer, Mark Jacobs, was equally stunned, his face ashen. He looked at the report, then at Mr. Harrison, realizing he had walked into a legal ambush of epic proportions. So, you see, Mr. Harrison continued, his tone now glacial, we are not here to ask for a settlement. We are here to present our terms. Mrs. Vance is legally entitled to 50% of all marital assets, which we value at approximately $110 million. That is $55 million in addition to her personal trust. He slid a new, much slimmer document across the table. However, Mrs. Vance is a reasonable woman. She has no desire to destroy the company you built, partly because her children may one day have an interest in it. Therefore, she is prepared to offer you a settlement. Richard couldn't speak. He just stared. Mrs. Vance will waive her claim to 50% of Vance Capital Properties. In return, you will sign over the Greenwich House, the Aspen Ski Lodge, and the entirety of the liquid investment portfolio valued at $20 million. You will also reimburse the marital estate for the $3.5 million you spent on Miss Sterling. You will keep your company and your personal effects. You will walk away with your business, your debt, and your dignity if you have any left. This is not an offer. It is a directive. You have 24 hours to sign. Richard finally found his voice a strangled whisper. Eleanor. How? Eleanor looked at him not with hatred or triumph, but with a profound, sorrowful pity. You never thought to ask about my family, Richard, she said softly. You were so busy building your own name you never considered that mine might be worth something. The reckoning was complete. In the silent, mahogany-paneled room, Richard Vance finally understood the truth. He hadn't been the king in their marriage. He had been the court jester, and he had never even known it. The 24 hours Mr. Harrison gave Richard were a descent into a private hell. He left the law office in a daze, stumbling through the bustling Boston streets like a man who had seen a ghost. His lawyer, Mark Jacobs, was already distancing himself, speaking in clipped, cautious tones about mitigating damage and the futility of fighting a trust like that. Richard's first call was to Amber. He needed to hear her voice to be reassured that his other life, the vibrant, adoring life he had built, was still real. He found her at a spa, her voice distracted. Richard, hi, she said, an audible sigh of impatience in her tone. I'm in the middle of a facial. Can this wait? No, it can't wait, he snapped, his voice cracking. Amber, we have a problem. A huge problem. He tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out in a jumbled, panicked torrent. Eleanor, she has money. A trust fund. $60 million. She knows everything. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Amber's voice, stripped of its usual breathy affection, came back sharp and cold. What do you mean she has $60 million? I thought you said she had nothing. I thought she didn't. I didn't know, he pleaded. But she's taking everything, the house, the accounts. She wants the money I spent on you back. Another pause, longer this time. The condo, Amber said, her voice flat. Is my name on the title? No, it's under the LLC, I told you. So you can take it back, she stated. And the Porsche is a lease. And the jewelry, I suppose she'll want that back too. Amber, listen to me, he begged, desperation creeping in. This is just a setback. I still have the company. We can fight this. There is no we, Richard. She cut him off, her voice like ice. I'm not signing up for your messy public and now apparently poor divorce. My brand can't take that kind of hit. I think it's best we don't speak again. Have your lawyer contact my lawyer regarding any assets you seem to think are yours. The line went dead. He stared at his phone, the silence screaming in his ear. The woman for whom he had risked everything, for whom he had spent millions, had just severed him from her life as easily as unfollowing an account. He had been a transaction, a convenient ATM, and his funds had just been frozen. The professional fallout was just as swift and brutal. News of the divorce, though not the specifics of the trust, leaked to the financial press. Rumors of Richard's financial recklessness began to circulate. His partners at Vance Capital, already nervous about the company's high leverage, called an emergency board meeting. When they confronted him, Richard, still reeling and emotionally raw, was defensive and belligerent. Within a week, they had invoked a clause in their partnership agreement to buy him out, citing conduct detrimental to the firm. They offered him a fraction of what his shares were worth, and he was too broken to fight it. The company that bore his name was no longer his. Bankruptcy wasn't a possibility. It was an inevitability. The empire he had spent a lifetime building had crumbled to dust in less than a month. Meanwhile, Eleanor moved with quiet efficiency. She didn't gloat or celebrate. There was no triumph in watching the father of her children self-destruct. Her actions were about preservation, not revenge. She sold the Greenwich house. It held too many ghosts. The sale, expedited by her new team of top-tier real estate agents, fetched a handsome price. She moved into a beautiful, light-filled penthouse apartment in a pre-war building on Park Avenue, a place that was hers alone. It was elegant but not ostentatious, a reflection of her true self. Her children were her anchor. They rallied around her, their initial shock giving way to a fierce loyalty. Lily, home from Yale for the weekend, helped her unpack boxes, her chatter filling the new apartment with life. I can't believe he thought he could get away with it, Lily fumed, placing a stack of books on a shelf. And that woman, I looked at her Instagram. She posted a picture with the Patek Philippe watch. It's disgusting. Thomas was more introspective. He visited his father once at the small rented apartment Richard had been forced to take. He found him a diminished figure, a man shrunken by failure and self-pity. He just kept asking about you, Thomas told Eleanor later that evening, swirling the ice in his glass. He asked if you were happy, if you hated him. He looks old. I don't hate him, Thomas, Eleanor said softly, looking out at the glittering skyline of her new life. I just don't know him anymore, and I'm not sure I ever really did. The greatest fallout for Richard wasn't financial. It was the complete and utter irrelevance he now faced. The invitations stopped coming. The calls weren't returned. The friends who had once clamored for his attention now looked away when they saw him. He had built his identity on the foundation of his success and his powerful marriage. Without them, he was nobody. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor received a package by courier. It was a small, worn velvet box. Inside was the canary yellow diamond ring. There was no note. She looked at it for a long moment, a symbol of a future that had almost happened, a future built on lies. Then she closed the box and placed it in a drawer. It would be sold and the money donated to a charity she was now establishing, the Pemberton Foundation for Women's Economic Empowerment. A new legacy born from the ashes of the old one. A year later, the name Eleanor Vance was no longer whispered in the context of a scandalous divorce. Instead, it was spoken with respect in the boardrooms of New York's most influential nonprofits. The Pemberton Foundation had become a formidable force, its mission to provide legal aid, financial literacy training, and seed funding for women escaping abusive or controlling situations. Eleanor, once the silent partner, had found her voice, and it was powerful. She sat in her office, a corner suite with panoramic views of Central Park, reviewing a grant proposal. The space was a reflection of her minimalist, elegant, and filled with art that she loved, not art that was meant to impress others. The quiet, unassuming wife had been shed like a skin, revealing the sharp, compassionate, and fiercely intelligent Pemberton woman beneath. Her relationship with her children had blossomed. Freed from the suffocating pretense of her marriage, she was more present, more authentic with them than ever before. Lily had graduated and, inspired by her mother's work, had taken a position at the foundation, bringing a youthful fire and a keen understanding of social media to their outreach. Thomas, now a vice president at his firm, served on the foundation's board, his financial acumen proving invaluable. They were a team bound by a new, more honest love. She rarely thought of Richard. She had heard through the grapevine that he had moved to Florida, attempting to get back into real estate on a much smaller, humbler scale. The swagger was gone, replaced by the quiet desperation of a man trying to recapture a glory that was lost forever. He had sent her a letter once, a rambling, self-pitying apology that was more about his own pain than hers. She read it, filed it away, and did not reply. His chapter was closed. This evening, the foundation was hosting its first major fundraising gala. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her new apartment, adjusting the strap of a simple, elegant black gown. She wore her mother's pearl necklace, a quiet statement of her heritage. There was a knock on her bedroom door. "Come in," she said. Thomas and Lily entered, both dressed for the event. They stopped in the doorway, looking at their mother. "Wow, Mom," Lily breathed. "You look incredible." Thomas smiled, a genuine warm smile. "You look happy." And in that moment, Eleanor knew it was true. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The pain of Richard's betrayal had been immense, a chasm that had threatened to swallow her whole. But in its depths, she had rediscovered herself. The trust fund hadn't just been a source of money. It had been a lifeline to her own identity. A legacy of strength passed down from a grandmother who knew that a woman's greatest asset is her independence. "Thank you, my loves," she said, her voice full of a warmth and confidence that had been absent for decades. "Shall we go? We have a lot of work to do." As they walked out into the glittering New York night, Eleanor Vance was not defined by the man who had left her or the money she possessed. She was defined by the life she was building, the women she was helping, and the powerful, quiet strength that had been there all along, just waiting for the storm to pass so it could finally see the sun. The gilded cage was a distant memory. She was finally completely free. 2 years after the gala, Eleanor had settled into a rhythm that was both demanding and deeply fulfilling. The Pemberton Foundation was a recognized name in New York philanthropy, and she guided it with a steady hand. She had found a peace she never thought possible, a life built on her own terms, filled with purpose and the uncomplicated love of her children. The past, with all its pain and drama, felt like a story about someone else. Then an email appeared in her personal inbox, slipping past the filters of her assistant. The sender was Richard Vance. Her finger hovered over the delete button, her first instinct to erase him as she had from her life. But curiosity, a final faint echo of their shared history, made her open it. The message was short and devoid of his old bluster. "Eleanor, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I will be in New York for one day next week. I need to see you, to speak with you for a few minutes, not about money or the past, but about the future. My future. Please, it's important. Richard." She closed the laptop, a swirl of unexpected emotions rising within her. There was no anger, no fear, just a weary sense of finality. She discussed it with her children that evening over dinner. "Don't go," Lily said immediately, her fork clattering onto her plate. "Mom, what could he possibly have to say?" "He's a black hole. Don't let him pull you back in." Thomas, ever the pragmatist, was more measured. "What do you think he wants?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "His email was different. It sounded desperate, but not for money. It sounded like a man at the end of his rope." "He made his rope let him use it," Lily muttered, but Eleanor felt a different pull. This wasn't for him. It was for her. Richard was the last ghost haunting the halls of her past. Perhaps a final face-to-face conversation was needed to truly exorcise him, to turn the final page and close the book for good. "I'll meet him," she decided, "but on my terms." She chose a neutral location, a bench in Central Park overlooking the conservatory water, a short walk from her office. It was public, yet offered a degree of privacy. It was her territory. When she saw him walking towards her, she was struck by how much he had diminished. The powerful, barrel-chested executive was gone. In his place was a man who looked his age and more. His hair was grayer. His shoulders slumped, and the expensive suit he wore seemed to hang off his thinner frame. The formidable presence had been replaced by a palpable air of defeat. "Eleanor," he said, his voice raspy, "thank you for coming." "Richard," she replied, her tone polite but distant. She remained standing. "You said this was important." He gestured to the bench, and after a moment's hesitation she sat at the opposite end. He didn't speak for a long time, just watched the model sailboats glide across the pond. "I sold the last of my properties in Florida," he began, his voice low. "It wasn't much, enough to clear my debts and live simply. The great Richard Vance, back to where he started, almost." Eleanor said nothing, simply waiting. "I've had a lot of time to think," he continued, finally turning to look at her. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now cloudy with regret. "About everything. But the thing I can't get out of my head is the trust. The $60 million. A flicker of the old irritation sparked in Eleanor. "I thought you said this wasn't about money." "It's not," he insisted, raising his hands. "It's not about the number, it's about the secret. All those years, Eleanor. All those dinners, those vacations, those nights we lay in bed talking. You were sitting on a fortune and you never said a word. Why?" This was the question that haunted him, the detail his ego couldn't process. It wasn't just that she had money, it was that she had a whole world he knew nothing about. Eleanor gave him a long, searching look. And for the first time she decided to give him the unvarnished truth. "Because it was never relevant to us, Richard," she said, her voice soft but firm. "My grandmother gave me that trust as a shield, not a sword. It was Pemberton money from a Pemberton life. The life I chose was with you. I wanted to be your partner, not your benefactor. I wanted us to build our life together. I loved you, and none of that other world mattered." She paused, letting the words settle. "The real question isn't why I never told you about the money. The real question is, in 25 years, why did you never ask? You never once asked about my family beyond polite small talk. You never wondered what my life was like before you. You weren't interested in Eleanor Pemberton. You were in love with the idea of Mrs. Vance, the supportive wife who decorated your perfect house and raised your perfect children. You never saw me, Richard. The real me was the secret, not the money." The truth landed with the force of a physical blow. He visibly flinched, the color draining from his face as he finally truly understood. He had been married to a stranger of his own making. Tears welled in his eyes, and he looked away ashamed. "I destroyed it all," he whispered. "For what?" "For a cheap thrill in an expensive apartment. I am so sorry, Eleanor. Not for the money I lost, but for the life I threw away. For the woman I was too blind to see." It was the apology she never knew she needed to hear. It was genuine, stripped of ego, born of pure, undiluted loss. Eleanor stood up. "I have to get back to my office," she said gently. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, final sense of pity. "I hope you find some peace, Richard." She turned and walked away without looking back, her posture straight, her steps confident. She left him on the bench, a solitary figure against the vastness of the park, a relic from a life she no longer lived. As she crossed the street and headed towards the building where her foundation was changing the lives of other women, she felt the last tether to her past snap. The final echo had faded into silence. She was completely and finally moving forward. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most profound strength. It's a story of betrayal, yes, but more importantly, it's a story of resilience, strategy, and the incredible power of reclaiming one's own narrative. She turned a devastating heartbreak into a legacy of empowerment that will help countless others. Her husband thought he was closing a chapter, but all he did was force her to open a book he never even knew existed. What would you have done in Eleanor's position? Would you have sought revenge? Or would you have chosen, as she did, to build something new and positive from the wreckage? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of strength and vindication resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner power, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable, true-life dramas. Thank you for listening.
The air on Calavigny Island tasted of salt and betrayal. One moment, Hayley Devereux was the pregnant, adored wife of a tech billionaire. The next, she was a spectacle of public humiliation. Under the glittering lights of his lavish party, her husband, Sebastian, didn't just end their marriage. He detonated it. With his mistress clinging to his arm, he publicly renounced Hayley and the child she carried, leaving her stranded on his private paradise as a tropical storm gathered on the horizon. He thought he had erased her, but he made one fatal mistake. He left her alive. The journey to Calavigny Island began not with the gentle hum of the Gulf Stream G750, but with the subtle, chilling click of a platinum lighter. Sebastian Devereux lit his Cuban cigar, the cherry glowing like a malevolent eye in the jet's dim cabin. He didn't offer one to his associates, and he didn't look at his wife, Hayley, who sat across from him, her hands resting protectively on the swell of her 5-month pregnancy. "It has to be perfect, Jenna," he said, his voice a low baritone that had charmed boardrooms and investors into handing over fortunes. The smoke he exhaled coiled towards the ceiling. "This party isn't just a party. It's a statement. It's the culmination of the Ethelred acquisition. Everyone who is anyone will be there. We need to project unassailable strength." Hayley managed a small smile. "Everything you do is perfect, Seb." It was the answer he expected, the one she had learned to give. Their life was a meticulously curated exhibition of success, and she was its most beautiful, most serene installation. They had met 3 years prior at a Sotheby's auction. She was a junior art consultant, advising a client on a minor Degas sculpture. He wasn't bidding. He was buying the auction house. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence and the way she spoke about art, with a passion that felt alien in his world of algorithms and market capitalizations. For Hayley, a woman raised by a university professor and a librarian in a quiet corner of Connecticut, Sebastian was a force of nature. His ambition was a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. He'd showered her with a life ripped from the pages of a luxury magazine, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a villa in Lake Como, and a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He loved her, she believed, for being his anchor, his peace in a world of cutthroat competition. But the gilded cage, no matter how opulent, was still a cage. Her opinions on art were now used to decorate his corporate lobbies. Her friends with their normal jobs and mortgages were politely phased out in favor of his circle of venture capitalists, socialites, and tech titans. He had even chosen the dress she was to wear tonight, a flowing seafoam green gown by a designer she'd never heard of. one that was meant to showcase her pregnancy in the most elegant, non-threatening way possible. The Beaumonts are arriving just after us. Sebastian continued scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving with ruthless efficiency. Blake Beaumont is a potential board member for the new conglomerate. His wife, Victoria. She can be a bit much, but she's influential. Be charming to her. Haley's smile tightened. Victoria Beaumont, a woman sculpted from marble and disdain, who looked at Haley as if she were a charming but ultimately temporary pet. Victoria was from Sebastian's world, old money, predatory ambition, and a shared history that was often hinted at but never clarified. The jet began its descent, breaking through a layer of pillowy clouds to reveal a turquoise expanse dotted with emerald islands. In the center, like a jewel, was Calavigny. It was Sebastian's ultimate status symbol, an 80-acre private island in the Grenadines that he'd purchased for an obscene sum. He'd spent 2 years and $100 million transforming it into his personal fiefdom, a paradise of Balinese-style villas, private beaches, and manicured jungle paths. As the plane touched down on the private airstrip, the cabin door opened to a wall of humid, fragrant air. A fleet of custom golf carts waited to whisk them to the main residence, a sprawling architectural masterpiece named The Overlook. Staff in crisp white uniforms lined the path, their heads bowed. It was a royal welcome. "Remember, Jenna?" Sebastian murmured, his hand on the small of her back, his touch feeling more like a positioning than a caress. Flawless. Tonight we are untouchable. She nodded the baby inside her, giving a gentle kick a secret reassurance. She walked beside her husband into the heart of the magnificent home. The sound of a string quartet already drifting from the grand terrace. Guests were beginning to arrive, their laughter mingling with the clinking of champagne flutes. Everything was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was, by all accounts, perfect. But as a grey bank of clouds began to mass on the distant horizon, Haley felt a shiver of unease, a premonition as dark and foreboding as the coming storm. The perfect world Sebastian had built felt impossibly fragile, like a house of cards waiting for a single, malicious puff of wind. She was about to find out that the wind was already in the room, and it was wearing Victoria Beaumont's smile. The party was an exercise in calculated excess. An oyster bar featured mollusks flown in from 5 different countries. A vodka luge carved from a single block of ice into a replica of Sebastian's corporate logo was the centerpiece of the main bar. Tech billionaires mingled with European aristocrats and supermodels, laughed with grizzled hedge fund managers. Haley played her part, a gracious hostess, floating through the crowd, her hand never far from her belly. She saw Sebastian across the infinity pool, locked in conversation with Blake and Victoria Beaumont. Victoria was dazzling in a crimson dress that seemed to defy gravity. She laughed at something Sebastian said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm and letting it linger just a moment too long. Haley had seen that gesture 100 times, a casual mark of territory that set her teeth on edge. She told herself it was just the paranoia of pregnancy. She turned to greet a senator from New York, discussing a recent museum gala when she felt a presence behind her. "You're glowing," Victoria purred her voice, like honey laced with arsenic. "Pregnancy suits you. It's so domestic." Haley forced a smile. "Thank you, Victoria. I see you're enjoying the party." "Oh, it's a Sebastian Devereaux party." "They're always legendary," Victoria replied, her eyes scanning Haley from head to toe. "That's a lovely color on you." Did Sebastian pick it out? He always had such specific tastes. The implication was clear. Another subtle jab to remind Haley of her place. Before she could respond, a low rumble echoed from across the sea. The wind picked up, rustling the palm fronds and making the paper lanterns dance violently. The sky, once a canvas of pastel sunset hues, was now a bruised purple. "Looks like we're in for a show," Victoria said with a smirk, seemingly unbothered. An hour later, the show began. The storm hit not with a gentle prelude, but with a sudden, furious onslaught. Rain came down in blinding sheets, driving the guests from the exposed terraces into the cavernous main hall of the Overlook. The string quartet was replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive crash of waves against the cliffs below. The lights flickered, casting the panicked faces of the elite in a strobe-like effect. In the ensuing chaos, Haley searched for Sebastian. She found him near the grand fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking utterly calm. He was with Victoria again. Blake was nowhere to be seen. "Seb, the staff is trying to get everyone to the storm shelters in the guest villas." Haley said, her voice tight with anxiety. "We should coordinate," he cut her off. His eyes cold and distant. "Everything is under control, Haley. Go and rest. You look pale." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. Hurt and confused, she began to walk away, but his next words stopped her dead. "She knows, Vic. It's time." The words were a low murmur, but in a sudden lull in the storm's fury, they carried across the marble floor with perfect, devastating clarity. Haley turned back slowly. Victoria was looking at her, a triumphant, pitying smile on her face. Sebastian's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "Knows what Seb?" Haley asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "What's going on?" Sebastian sighed, a theatrical sound of weary impatience. He took a step forward, and the small crowd that had been huddled nearby fell silent, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The drama of the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within the walls of the Overlook. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely between himself and Haley. "This arrangement, it has run its course." Haley's blood ran cold. "Arrangement? You mean our marriage?" "I mean, the charade." He corrected his voice, rising, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. He was performing now. This was his stage. "I needed a certain image for the Ethelred deal. A stable, traditional man. You played that part beautifully, I'll admit." A collective gasp went through the audience of his peers. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Haley felt her face flush with heat, 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her humiliation. "The deal is done." Sebastian continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. "My company is secure, and I no longer require the props." "Props." Her voice was a choked whisper. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the life inside her. "Is that what your son is to you? A prop?" Sebastian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "My son? Oh, Haley, you are delightfully naive. I have my lawyers the best in the world. They've raised some very interesting questions about the timeline of your pregnancy, about your fidelity." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a lie, a monstrous, baseless lie. But he said it with such conviction that doubt flickered in the eyes of the onlookers. He was poisoning the well, destroying her reputation to ensure his own clean getaway. "That's not true," she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You know that's not true." "Does it matter?" he shot back. "I'm Sebastian Devereux. My truth is the one that gets printed." He then turned and took Victoria's hand, pulling her to his side. He held her hand up for all to see. "Victoria and I are going to be together. It's been a long time coming. She understands my world. She belongs in it." Victoria looked at Haley, her eyes gleaming with victory. She had won. "You will be given a severance," Sebastian said, as if firing a disloyal employee. "Generous, of course. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will disappear quietly. My jet will take you back to the mainland in the morning after the storm passes. The staff will show you to a guest room." He turned his back on her, a final, brutal act of dismissal. He had just executed her socially and emotionally in front of the most powerful people he knew. Stranded pregnant and publicly branded an unfaithful, disposable wife, Haley stood frozen in the center of the room. The lights flickered again, and then died, completely plunging the hall into darkness, save for the frantic beams of staff flashlights and the periodic terrifying flashes of lightning from outside. In that moment of absolute darkness, a tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It felt as hot as acid. The gilded cage hadn't just opened. It had been vaporized, and she was left falling with no ground in sight. The darkness was a perverse mercy. It hid the smirks, the pitying glances, the avid curiosity on the faces of the guests. A member of the staff, a young woman named Sophia, whose kindness had always seemed genuine, gently touched Haley's arm. "Ma'am, let me take you to your room. It's not safe here." Haley allowed herself to be led away, moving like a sleepwalker through the opulent halls that now felt like a mausoleum. The room they took her to was not her own. It was a sterile, impersonal guest suite at the far end of the estate, as far from Sebastian as possible. Sophia lit some candles, her expression full of a sorrow she couldn't voice. "Is there anything I can get you?" "Mrs. Devereux." The name was a slap. "Don't call me that," Haley whispered, her voice raw. "My name is Haley McClellan." Reclaiming her maiden name was the first act of defiance, a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. Sophia nodded and quietly left, closing the door behind her. Haley was alone with the roaring storm and the ruins of her life. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her body trembling. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm, as if sensing its mother's distress. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was terrified. Sebastian's lie about her fidelity wasn't just a cruel parting shot. It was a strategic move to disown their child, to absolve himself of all responsibility, to paint her as a gold-digging fraud. He controlled the media, the lawyers, the narrative. If she stayed, she'd be trapped in a public relations war she couldn't possibly win. He would crush her. She and her child would be footnotes in the story of his glorious rise, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She couldn't let that happen. Her child deserved more than a life lived in the shadow of Sebastian's lies. An idea, wild and desperate, began to form. Disappear. Not just leave, but vanish. He expected her to take his severance and slink away broken. He would never expect her to simply cease to exist. The storm was her cover. The chaos was her opportunity. Driven by a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity, Haley stood up. She couldn't take anything that belonged to him. Not the designer clothes in the closet, not the jewels in the safe. She took off the 7-carat diamond ring he'd placed on her finger and set it on the nightstand. It felt like removing a shackle. She was wearing only the seafoam green gown, now damp and stained. It would have to do. She went to the window. It overlooked a steep garden path that led down towards a small private cove, one rarely used by guests. The rain was relentless, turning the manicured landscape into a treacherous river of mud. It was dangerous, but staying was a death sentence of a different kind. Taking a deep breath, she slipped out of the villa. The wind tore at her, plastering the thin fabric of her dress to her body. She was instantly soaked to the bone. Her hair whipped across her face, blinding her. She half ran, half slid down the muddy path, grabbing onto tree trunks and roots to keep from falling. Thorns tore at her dress and her skin. The perfect paradise had become a hostile wilderness. She reached the cove. The waves were monstrous, crashing against the rocks with a terrifying power. A small boat dock used for jet skis and tenders was being battered by the surf. Tied to it was a small inflatable Zodiac boat, its motor covered with a tarp probably left by a maintenance worker who had fled for shelter. It was her only chance. Her fingers were numb with cold as she struggled with the ropes. A massive wave crashed over the dock, nearly sweeping her off her feet. She clung to a piling, her knuckles white. The baby felt like a lead weight in her belly. "We can do this," she thought, a mantra against the screaming wind. "We have to do this." Finally, the last knot gave way. She clambered into the Zodiac, her body screaming with protest. She fumbled with the tarp, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She pulled the cord on the small outboard motor. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Panic began to set in. On the third pull, a wave of desperation lending her strength. The motor sputtered to life with a choked cough. She steered the small boat away from the island into the churning Black Sea. It was an act of insanity. The Zodiac was tossed about like a toy, cresting massive waves that threatened to swallow it whole. Salt spray stung her eyes, and the roar of the engine was lost in the fury of the storm. She had no idea where she was going, only that she was moving away from Sebastian, away from the life that had tried to destroy her. She didn't know how long she fought the storm. It could have been minutes or hours. Her arms ached, her body was bruised, and a chilling exhaustion was seeping into her bones. The lights of Calivigny Island were long gone. She was a tiny, insignificant speck in a world of violent water and wind. Just as she felt her strength give out, as the engine sputtered and died, a light cut through the rain. It was a beam, powerful and steady, sweeping across the waves. It found her. The beam belonged to a larger vessel, a sturdy-looking yacht that was riding out the storm in the lee of a neighboring smaller island. Men were shouting. A rope ladder was thrown down. Strong hands pulled her from the half-swamped Zodiac onto the deck of the yacht. She collapsed, shivering and incoherent, into the arms of a figure who wrapped her in a thick, dry blanket. She looked up into the face of an old man, with kind, concerned eyes and a shock of white hair. He was a guest from the party she vaguely recalled, an investor from a bygone era, one who had watched the evening's drama unfold with a quiet, thoughtful detachment. "You're safe now, my dear," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "My name is Desmond Wallace, and I think it's fair to say your life has just taken a rather dramatic turn. Let's get you warm, and then we can decide what comes next." As she slipped into an exhausted unconsciousness, Hayley McClellan knew one thing for certain. Her old life was over, drowned in the storm. A new one, terrifying and unknown, had just begun. The next 5 years were a lifetime. Haley awoke on Desmond Wallace's yacht, the Wanderer. Not as a victim, but as a blank slate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue and a sea as calm as glass. Calivigny Island was a distant smudge on the horizon, a place she vowed never to see again, not as she was. Desmond Wallace was more than just a kind stranger. He was a legend in the world of old money and discreet power. A self-made shipping magnate who had cashed out decades ago, he had watched men like Sebastian Devereux, arrogant, flashy, and ultimately hollow, rise and fall like the tides. He had seen the cruelty at the party, and in Haley he saw not a broken woman, but a core of tempered steel she didn't yet know she possessed. He made a grave error, Haley Desmond told her over a cup of tea in his yacht's study. A room panelled in rich mahogany and lined with books. He underestimated you. Men like Devereux always do. They see a beautiful wife, not a brilliant partner. Their ego is their Achilles' heel. He offered her a choice. He could arrange for her to be safely and anonymously returned to the United States with a small trust fund to start over. Or she could stay with him, learn from him, and forge a new identity, a new life on her own terms. Revenge is a fool's game. He said, his gaze steady. But justice is the business of building a better future on the wreckage of the past. He tried to erase you. The greatest justice it is not to haunt him, but to become someone he could never imagine. Haley chose the latter. Her son was born 3 months later in a private clinic in Geneva, Switzerland. She named him Leo for the lion-hearted courage he had given her. Holding him for the first time, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was building a dynasty for him, a legacy free from the taint of the Devereux name. Under Desmond's tutelage, Haley McClellan ceased to exist. In her place emerged Haley Monroe, a name chosen for its classic strength. She devoured Desmond's library, learning about global finance, sovereign debt, emerging markets, and corporate law. She had a natural aptitude for seeing patterns, a skill honed during her years studying art history, and she applied it to the complex tapestry of the financial world. Desmond treated her like the daughter he never had. He taught her how to negotiate with sharks, how to leverage debt, how to create shell corporations and offshore accounts, not for evasion, but for protection and strategic advantage. He refined her, sharpening her intellect until it was a weapon. She learned 4 languages. She traveled with him on the Wanderer, sitting in on meetings in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Monaco, a silent observer who absorbed everything. Leo grew up on the yacht, his world a shifting landscape of international ports and the unwavering love of his mother. He had her thoughtful eyes, and to Haley's secret, painful acknowledgement, Sebastian's determined chin. He was smart, resilient, and knew nothing of the father who had disowned him. His father, in every way that mattered, was the kind old man who taught him how to fish off the coast of Greece and read him stories about great explorers. When Leo was 4, Desmond's health began to fail. He had lived a full life and was ready for its final chapter. One afternoon, anchored off the coast of Croatia, he called Haley to his study. "I'm not leaving you a fortune, my dear," he said, his voice weaker now, but still clear. "I'm leaving you an arsenal. The companies, the accounts, the contacts, they are all tools. What you build with them is up to you." He passed away a week later, peacefully in his sleep. His will was simple. The bulk of his vast, labyrinthine estate was left to a charitable foundation. but a significant, strategically chosen portfolio of assets, worth nearly $1 billion if managed correctly, was left to one Haley Monroe. Along with it was a single sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter. My dearest Haley, I hope I have given you the means to secure your and Leo's future. But I know you. You have a fire in you that peace alone will not quench. There is one piece of unfinished business. I have learned through my network that Sebastian Devereux is selling Calivigny Island. His tech empire is over-leveraged, and he needs liquid capital. He sees the island as a monument to a past triumph. I see it as a stage. Go and claim it. Not for revenge, but to prove once and for all that the future is not written by the men who build gilded cages, but by the women who learn to fly out of them. Your friend Desmond. Reading the letter, Haley felt a chill run down her spine. The island, the site of her greatest humiliation. For 5 years, she had meticulously built a fortress around her heart, focusing only on the future. But Desmond was right. To truly be free, she had to go back to the beginning. She had to face the ghost of her past. She looked at the financial reports Desmond had left her. She saw the network of holding companies, the web of assets. She began to formulate a plan, not with the desperation of an escaped victim, but with the cold, calculating precision of a corporate raider. Sebastian Devereux thought he had destroyed Haley McClellan 5 years ago in a storm. He had no idea that he had inadvertently forged Haley Monroe in the crucible of his own cruelty. And she was coming back to collect. The sale of Calivigny Island was not a public affair. It was a quiet, discreet offering circulated among the world's ultra-elite through a handful of exclusive brokerage firms in Zurich and London. Sebastian Devereux, true to form, couldn't bear the public humiliation of a fire sale. The official narrative was that he was realigning his portfolio to focus on new philanthropic ventures. It was a lie, and everyone in his circle knew it. His tech company, Ethelred, once the darling of Silicon Valley, was hemorrhaging money. A series of disastrous product launches and a nasty patent lawsuit had eroded investor confidence. The stock was in a death spiral. Sebastian and Victoria's lavish lifestyle, once funded by soaring profits, was now financed by debt. The island was his most liquid, most valuable, non-corporate asset. He needed to sell, and he needed to sell fast. From a quiet, modern office in Geneva, Haley Monroe orchestrated her attack. She was no longer a woman in a seafoam green dress. She was a spectre in the machine, a name on a letterhead that no one could trace back to the wife Sebastian had discarded. She operated through 3 different shell corporations, registered in 3 different countries. A real estate holding firm in the Cayman Islands, a financial services company in Luxembourg, and a consulting group in Delaware. Each was a cutout, a layer of insulation between her and the final transaction. Her lead negotiator was a shrewd, silver-haired Swiss lawyer named Anton Gruber, a man who had been fiercely loyal to Desmond Wallace for 40 years. He never asked about his new client's motives. He only executed her instructions with brutal efficiency. Sebastian's asking price was $150 million. It was inflated based on what he had spent on it, not its current market value. He's sentimental, and he's desperate, Haley told Anton over a secure video call. His ego won't let him accept a low-ball offer. So we won't make one. We will make him feel like he's winning right up until the end. Their first move was to create a competitor. Haley used the Delaware Corporation to put in a deliberately clumsy low offer of $90 million, leaking it to a financial gossip blog. The story framed it as an insult, a sign of Devereux's fallen status. Sebastian, predictably, was enraged. He publicly rejected the offer, his pride forcing him to hold firm on his price. That was when Anton Gruber, representing the Luxembourg firm Orion Capital, entered the picture. He approached Sebastian's brokers with a much more serious offer of $125 million. He was professional, courteous, and projected an air of immense old-world wealth. After the insult of the first bid, Sebastian saw Orion Capital as a serious, respectable buyer. The negotiations dragged on for weeks. Sebastian, squeezed by his creditors, pushed for a higher price. Haley, through Anton, held firm. She knew Sebastian's quarterly earnings report was due to be released, and she had done her homework. It was going to be a bloodbath. The day the disastrous report was published, Ethelred's stock plunged another 30%. Sebastian's bankers were calling. The pressure was immense. That same afternoon, Anton received a call. Sebastian would accept the $125 million, but he had one condition: a fast, all-cash closing in under a week, with no contingencies. It was a move designed to weed out anyone who didn't have immediate access to that kind of capital. "He is testing us," Anton told Haley. "He believes no one can move that quickly." "He's right," Haley said with a thin smile. "No one can. But we can." She initiated a complex series of wire transfers, moving funds from various accounts Desmond had left, her routing them through the Cayman Islands holding company, and finally consolidating them in an escrow account managed by Orion Capital in Zurich. It was a symphony of international finance, conducted flawlessly. 5 days later, the deal was ready to close. The final contracts were to be signed. The buyer was listed as Kalivigny Holdings Limited, a subsidiary of Orion Capital. The signatory for the buyer was Anton Gruber. Haley's name was nowhere on the documents. From her office in Geneva, she watched a live feed from the closing room in Zurich. She saw Sebastian Devereux on the screen, looking older and more strained than she remembered. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle facade. Victoria was not with him. He signed the documents with a flourish of his pen, a man trying to pretend he was in control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond him. Once his signature was on the page, Anton signed for the buyer. A lawyer nodded. The deal was done. The island was hers. Haley felt no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound quiet and deeply satisfying sense of completion. It was a transaction. A problem had been solved. A debt had been settled. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at Lake Geneva. The first phase of her plan was complete. Now it was time to prepare the stage. She picked up her phone and dialed her new estate manager, a woman hand-picked for her discretion and impeccable taste. "Good morning, Catherine Haley," said her voice, calm and steady. "We can now begin the renovations on the island. I have the guest list for the grand reopening party. I want the invitations sent out by the end of the week. Oh, and Catherine. The new owner wishes to remain anonymous for now. All correspondence should be from GM Enterprises." She hung up the phone. GM Haley Monroe, a name Sebastian Devereux would not recognize. But soon he would. He and everyone else who had watched her fall would be invited back to the scene of the crime. Only this time she wouldn't be the spectacle. She would be the architect. The invitation arrived in a world that had moved on. 5 years is an eternity in the sphere of the ultra-rich. Fortunes are made. Empires crumble. Alliances shift. for Sebastian and Victoria Devereux. The past 5 years had been a slow, grinding descent. The sale of the island had provided a temporary reprieve, but it was like using a teacup to bail out a sinking ship. Ethelred was a shadow of its former self, propped up by risky loans and the sheer force of Sebastian's denial. Their social standing, once unassailable, had become precarious. They were no longer the power couple everyone clamored to be near. They were the couple people whispered about their troubles a source of delicious gossip. Their marriage, born of ambition and betrayal, had curdled into a partnership of mutual resentment, held together only by a shared fear of losing their status. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a private courier. It was a heavy, cream-colored card, thick as a book cover, with minimalist, embossed gold lettering. There was no gaudy crest, no ostentatious design. Its power lay in its understated elegance. GM Enterprises cordially invites you to celebrate the reawakening of Calivigny Island. A weekend of tranquility and new beginnings. The date was set for a month away. The details were sparse, promising private jet transport from select global capitals and an experience of unparalleled bespoke luxury. The host was identified only as the island's new anonymous owner. Victoria, her face a carefully maintained mask of cosmetic enhancements, turned the card over in her hands. GM Enterprises, who the hell is that? Must be some new Russian oligarch or a Saudi prince. Tacky to be so mysterious. Sebastian, however, felt a flicker of something else. Not excitement, but a gnawing curiosity mixed with the bitter tang of loss. Everyone is talking about it, he said, scrolling through his phone. The entire guest list from that night. They all got at one. It's a power play. The new owner is making a statement inviting the old king's court to see the new regime. So we're not going, Victoria stated flatly. The island held nothing but sour memories for her, now a monument to a victory that had ultimately felt hollow. We have to go, Sebastian countered, his voice sharp. Not going would be an admission of defeat. It would be telling the world that we can't stand to see someone else own our old property. It would be weak. We will go, we will smile, we will praise the new owner's taste, and we will act as if selling that rock was the smartest decision we ever made. We have to maintain appearances, Victoria. It's all we have left. And so they accepted, as did everyone else. The mystery was too tantalizing to ignore. For the next month, the sole topic of conversation in their elite circles was the identity of GM. On the appointed day, Sebastian and Victoria boarded a chartered jet, a far cry from their old G650. The other passengers were familiar faces from their past, the same hedge fund managers, socialites, and tech moguls. But the atmosphere was different. The fawning respect they once commanded was gone, replaced by a polite, cool distance. They were no longer the sun around which these people orbited. They were just two more guests. As the jet descended towards the familiar airstrip, Sebastian felt a pit in his stomach. The island looked different, more lush. The main residence, the overlook, had been subtly altered. The stark modernist lines he had favored were softened by cascades of vibrant bougainvillea. The architecture was the same, but the soul of the place felt new. They were greeted not by staff in starchy formal uniforms, but by hosts in elegant flowing linen. The atmosphere was not one of opulent servitude, but of relaxed, confident hospitality. There was no string quartet playing Vivaldi, but the sophisticated ambient tones of a modern electronic composer. Their bags were whisked away to their suite, a guest villa not the owner's residence they had once occupied. It was the very same suite where Haley had been sent after her public humiliation. The irony was so thick it was suffocating, though Sebastian was the only one who seemed to notice. That evening, the welcome reception was held on the main terrace. It mirrored the party from 5 years ago, yet it was an inversion of it. The garish ice sculpture was gone, replaced by a stunning piece of modern art. The food was not a buffet of excess, but a curated selection of exquisite, locally sourced tapas. Everything was better, more tasteful, more confident, more powerful. Sebastian felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't the work of some new money brute. This was the work of someone with impeccable taste and a deep understanding of psychology. Someone who knew exactly what this place once represented and was systematically dismantling it. He and Victoria mingled, putting on their brave faces, but the whispers were everywhere. "Who is GM? Have you seen the new art collection? I heard they bought the island for cash, no financing." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests, a woman, the estate manager Catherine, stepped onto a small, discreet stage. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome," she said, her voice amplified just enough to be heard over the gentle music. "On behalf of our host, we are so thrilled you could join us for this special weekend." In a few moments, the owner of this island, the visionary behind GM Enterprises, would like to say a few words. A buzz of anticipation went through the crowd. Everyone craned their necks, looking towards the main entrance of the villa. Sebastian found himself holding his breath. He needed to see the person who had done this, the person who had bought his past and so effortlessly improved upon it. The music softened. The lights on the terrace dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the empty stage. The moment was pregnant with expectation, and from the shadows of the grand archway, a figure emerged. A woman. She was tall and poised, wearing a simple but exquisitely cut evening gown of deep sapphire blue. Her hair was pulled back, accentuating a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly new. It was a face sculpted by strength, intelligence, and an unshakable, chilling calm. A collective audible gasp rippled through the guests. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone terrace. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. His heart stopped. He was looking at a ghost. But she was not a ghost. She was real. It was Haley. She walked to the center of the stage, her movements possessing a liquid grace that was utterly captivating. The sapphire dress, a column of midnight silk, seemed to absorb the ambient light, making her the undeniable focal point of the entire terrace. She didn't look angry, or triumphant, or vengeful. She looked serene, a queen, taking her place on her throne not by conquest but by divine right. Her posture was perfect, her shoulders back radiating a confidence that was so absolute it felt like a physical force. This was not the gentle, accommodating Haley they remembered. This was a woman forged in a fire they couldn't possibly comprehend. A staff member offered her a microphone, but she waited a long, deliberate moment before taking it, letting the silence and the crushing weight of the crowd's shock settle over the terrace. Her eyes, cool and analytical, swept across the sea of stunned, upturned faces. They passed over tech moguls who had once ignored her and socialites who had whispered about her. Finally, her gaze landed on Sebastian and Victoria. She held their stare for a single protracted heartbeat, a moment stretched into an eternity. In that silent, chilling acknowledgement, they knew, with bone-deep certainty, that this was not a coincidence. This was not a chance encounter. This was an appointment, an execution meticulously planned and 5 years in the making. Victoria's manicured fingers tightened on the stem of her wine glass, the crystal groaning under the pressure. Beside her, Sebastian stood utterly frozen, a statue of disbelief carved from ice. The man who always had a plan, always had an angle, was completely, terrifyingly adrift. His mind, usually a supersonic calculator of risk and opportunity, was blank with static. Impossible. It's not her. It's a trick, a ghost. But his heart, hammering against his ribs, knew the truth. "Welcome back to Calavigny Island," Haley finally said. Her voice was not the soft, hesitant tone he remembered. It was richer, deeper, and resonated with an unshakable authority that commanded the attention of every person present. "I see some familiar faces. It's been 5 years. A great deal can change in 5 years." She paused, allowing the profound understatement to land with the force of a physical blow. The whispers began to erupt, a panicked, sibilant sound like dry leaves, skittering across pavement. "It's her. My God. It's actually her. How is this possible? Where did she get the money?" Sebastian could feel the collective gaze of the crowd shift, flickering between the woman on the stage and him. He was no longer a guest. He was part of the spectacle. The other half of a story, whose ending he had written long ago only to find the protagonist had returned to pen a final, brutal chapter. "Some of you may remember me," she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of supreme, untouchable control, though perhaps in a different context. "The last time we were all gathered here on a rather stormy evening, I was the wife of the host. Tonight, she let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into a silent pool. I am simply the host." The implication was a thunderclap. Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp. The wine glass, forgotten in her hand, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not shatter on the stone terrace. It landed on the manicured lawn, just beside it, with a dull, muffled thud, a sound of anticlimax that was somehow more unnerving than a crash. "I understand there is some curiosity," Haley said, her voice smoothly overriding the rising clamor. "Let me be clear. This weekend is not about dwelling on the past. It is about building the future. It is about celebrating new beginnings." Her eyes swept the horizon towards the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. This island, once a symbol of brittle, fleeting power, a monument to an ego, is being reborn. It will now be the headquarters for my foundation, a sanctuary dedicated to supporting emerging artists and entrepreneurs who value creativity over currency. She was rewriting history, erasing his legacy with a few effortless sentences and replacing it with her own nobler vision. Every word was a calculated demolition of the world he had built. He had used the island to project strength. She was using it to project purpose. The comparison was devastating, and he could feel the judgment of his peers turning on him. However, she added, and her tone shifted, the philanthropic warmth evaporating, replaced by the chilling precision of a boardroom executioner. New beginnings sometimes require the clearing of old debts, and in the world of business, as we all know, all debts must eventually be paid. Her eyes, like chips of obsidian, locked onto Sebastian's. He felt pinned by her gaze, a specimen under a microscope. For instance, Haley said, her voice now a clinical, dispassionate instrument. "Some of you here tonight are investors in a company called Ethelred. My advice as a courtesy from your host would be to divest immediately." Their recent financing, the series of high-risk loans that have been keeping them afloat for the past 6 months, were not from a traditional banking institution. They were extended by a private equity firm, a rather aggressive firm named Orion Capital. A new wave of murmurs this time, laced with genuine financial panic, rippled through the guests. Several people, no longer trying to be discreet, pulled out their phones and began typing furiously. The name Orion Capital meant nothing to them, but the warning from the woman who clearly held all the cards was enough. But to Sebastian, the name was a death knell. Orion Capital was his lifeline, his secret savior, the anonymous entity that had given him the capital to stave off ruin. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in his stomach as he began to connect the impossible dots. Haley let him squirm in that silent horror for a moment before continuing. Orion. Capital, as of last week, was acquired in a rather swift, hostile takeover by my own holding company, which means, Sebastian, that the 9-figure debt you thought you owed to a stranger, you now owe to me. The crowd gasped as one. This was beyond revenge. This was a strategic masterwork of such breathtaking cruelty that it bordered on art. "I'm calling in the loan," she stated as simply as if she were ordering a coffee. "All of it. The covenants in your agreement are rather strict, as desperate men tend to overlook the fine print. I believe the default clause can be triggered by me at my sole discretion, and I am exercising that discretion. Effective tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Zurich time, your company will be in receivership. My people will be at your offices to oversee the liquidation." Sebastian actually staggered a step back, his hand flying to a nearby pillar for support. This was it. The end. Not just failure, but total annihilation delivered publicly by the woman he had tried to erase. Haley's gaze then shifted with chilling nonchalance to Victoria. And Victoria, your new lifestyle brand, a noble effort to remain relevant. Unfortunately, your primary seed investor, a small venture capital fund called Beaumont Ventures, has also just been acquired by a subsidiary of GM Enterprises. We will be re-evaluating all current investments, and I'm afraid a vanity project with no discernible path to profitability does not align with our portfolio strategy. Your funding will be terminated effective immediately. If Sebastian's ruin was a cannon blast, Victoria's was the silent, deadly slice of a stiletto. Her carefully constructed world of influence and appearances evaporated in an instant. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, taut mask of shock and hatred. Having delivered her financial death blows, Haley's expression softened, but it was a change that brought no comfort. It was the prelude to the final, most personal devastation. But as I said, she repeated her voice now imbued with a quiet power. Tonight is about the future. From the shadows at the side of the stage, a door to the main residence opened. The estate manager, Catherine, emerged holding the hand of a small boy, no older than 5. He was dressed in a simple white linen shirt and trousers, his dark hair neatly combed. He walked with a child's unself-conscious curiosity, his eyes taking in the strange crowd. He walked straight to Haley, who knelt down, her entire being softening as she wrapped a protective arm around him. "I would like you all to meet the true owner of this island's future," she said, her voice thick with a love that was a tangible, fiercely protective force. "This is my son, Leo." Leo looked out at the crowd, his gaze unafraid. He had his mother's thoughtful eyes, but everything else, the dark, unruly hair, the strong set of his jaw, The determined shape of his chin was pure, undiluted Devereux. He was the spitting image of a younger, uncorrupted Sebastian. The paternity he had so publicly and callously questioned 5 years ago was now presented as irrefutable evidence to the very same jury that had witnessed his crime. The silence on the terrace was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb. The social and emotional checkmate was complete. Every lie Sebastian had ever told about her, about their child, was laid bare for all to see. Haley stood up, holding her son's hand firmly in hers. She didn't spare another glance for the wreckage she had wrought. She didn't need to gloat or scream. Her victory was in her calm, in her control, in the simple, undeniable fact that she was standing there, whole and powerful with her son by her side. She looked at Sebastian one last time, and there was nothing in her eyes. Not hatred, not pity, not even the memory of love. It was the flat, dismissive look one gives to a piece of furniture, to something utterly irrelevant that is about to be removed. "Enjoy the party," she said to the assembled guests, her voice once again the gracious host. Then she turned her back on her former husband, on the woman who had replaced her, and on the entire life that had almost destroyed her. She walked off the stage with her son, disappearing back into the magnificent home that was now hers, leaving everyone else standing in the beautiful, perfect, and utterly ruthless world she had created. The party's ambient music swelled to fill the silence, but it couldn't hide the sound of a world ending for the two figures left standing alone in the center of it all. That night, Haley Monroe didn't just reclaim her name. She forged a new legend. Her story became a whisper, then a roar in the circles of the powerful, a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the castles you build, but the ashes you rise from. She transformed Calivigny Island from a monument of ego into a beacon of hope, proving that the deepest betrayals can fuel the most incredible transformations. Her revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, undeniable hum of a new empire being built upon the foundations of an old one's collapse. She became the architect of her own destiny, the queen of her own island, and a mother who showed her son that a person's worth is not determined by who tried to break them, but by how they choose to rebuild. What did you think of Haley's ultimate comeback? Was her justice served cold, or was it just right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had a moment where you had to rise from the ashes, share your story of strength. We are inspired by resilience. For more stories of incredible twists and ultimate triumph, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling stories like this to you.